Hi, and thank you very much for joining me here. I'm here today outside of the Alberta Legislature, which is, of course, on Treaty 6 territory, and also this place is very important to the Métis people of Alberta who share a deep connection with this land. Tomorrow, the Government of Alberta, the elected ministers working in this very building behind me, will be releasing their first quarter fiscal update. And it won't come to a surprise to anyone here in Alberta that we expect a major surplus to be reported, a surplus driven by record revenue. Let's be clear. The government's policies had nothing to cause this windfall. This is money that comes as a direct result of surging global demand for the resources that belong to all of us. But while we all own the resources, Albertans certainly aren't seeing the benefit. In fact, we know Albertans are struggling at a greater rate than most Canadians across the country. A recent survey conducted by MNP showed that half of Albertans were just $200 away from not being able to pay their bills at the end of the month, the highest percentage of anywhere in the country. And we know that grocery prices have skyrocketed. Some items like vegetable oil, lettuce, and certain cuts of beef have shot up more than 30%. Another survey from Ipsos found more than 60% of Albertans are concerned they may not have enough money to feed their families. And a recent University of Toronto study found that more than 20% of Albertans were food insecure, meaning they don't have certainty on where their next meal will come from. It's the highest rate of food insecurity anywhere in the country. Meanwhile, inflation was 8.4% reported in June, but wages only went up an average of 3.3%. That means Albertans were working harder and harder, and despite this, they are seeing a cut in their real pay, and they're falling further behind. Families need help, and they need it now. That's why I'm here today to demand that the UCP step up to the plate and deliver relief in the form of a massive fee holiday. There are so many ways that the government has piled on costs, and I'll start with some of the most obvious. They could reconvene the House and reverse their decision to increase personal income taxes. This decision in their very first year, a decision that the UCP government made, has piled more than $650 million in additional taxes onto families, and that will hit $1 billion very soon. So we're calling on them to reverse that immediately. They should also reverse their cut to AISH and seniors benefits and the child and family benefit. By removing those provisions in their first budget, the UCP has left people who rely on these vital supports and programs to fall further and further behind. Prices for food have shot up dramatically, but those benefits have not increased by one single penny. And this is, of course, wrong, and it's cruel. It is no doubt having a direct effect on the number of Albertans piling on debt and needing to rely on the food bank. The UCP should also reinstate a cap on automobile insurance, which we know has increased more than 30% for some Alberta drivers. So let's be clear, Alberta workers should not be penalized for relying on their vehicles to get to and from work. The UCP could reinstate our utility cap to save families money who are trying to keep the lights on. It goes on and on. And in my role as education critic, I know fees and costs associated with back to school can be incredibly stressful for Alberta families, and that it will only be made worse by the massive surge that they're feeling in inflation. That's why this government could also reimpose legislation to remove certain school fees and could provide funding to keep the cost for school supplies, bus rides, and other fees down. They could also support young Albertans enrolled in post-secondary by reinstating a cap on tuition and the rate of inflation and sticking to that cap. We know this government has jacked up fees by more than 20% since taking office for students going to post-secondary. And there is another smaller fees that are still hammering household budgets that could be removed with a stroke of a pen. So for example, the government could go back to funding legally required medical exams for seniors wanting to drive their vehicles. Right now they have to pay out of pocket. They could remove the Kananaskis country fee that serves only to ruin family weekends and isn't even being directed back into K-Country. They could also reverse costs increased to provincial museums and other attractions, allowing families to afford a last little bit of summer fun before kids get back into the full swing of things this fall. I'm told, and I'm here today with a simple request. The UCP government, to both the people claiming to be working on behalf of Albertans in this building behind me, and to the outgoing Premier, who's on a costly junket halfway around the world right now. I want them to know that Alberta's NDP is right here. We're listening to the real struggles of Albertans. And we want to give Alberta families a break. We want to give them a holiday from the endless onslaught of UCP tax hikes and fee hikes and other extreme costs. So to Albertans, I want to say that whatever happens this week and over the coming weeks, Alberta's NDP is listening to you. And we hear your challenges, and we want to make sure that you can keep your lights on, and that you have food in your home, and that there's gas in your car. And while we are still doing some work on the next election platform, we will be putting forward a plan for all of you to consider in the lead up to that. But my commitment is this: no matter what, with an NDP government in place, there will be more money in your pocket, and you will have more money to spend on the essentials and a few little extras for you and your family. Thank you. We're happy to take your questions.
Thank you, and I'll start with questions in person. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks.
Hi, Joe with CTV. In Saskatchewan, they're doing, so they announced their surplus last week, and
Right.
I believe it's called Mo money.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say about something like Kenny Cash? Just speculation here, but what would you welcome something like that?
Yeah, and what I am here today to really highlight is the fact that Jason Kenney and the UCP, every one of these ministers behind us, has really jacked up fees and made life way more expensive. So I know that people would like more money back in their pockets. I certainly would welcome that as well. One of the best ways to keep it there, though, is to reduce the costs that they keep piling onto Alberta families. So there are so many ways that they've jacked up fees that they could reverse immediately to make sure that if there is money in our pockets, it can stay there.
Got it. And you kind of went over a number of things that the UCP can do.
Yeah.
You also just mentioned a couple, but if you had to, maybe simplify it a little bit and hammer down on one or two things that you think are most important for the UCP to do tomorrow?
Yeah, I'd say one that hits every single Alberta family, and one that Jason Kenney fought very hard against when he was in opposition in Ottawa, but certainly as soon as he was in a position of any power, he and his cabinet very quickly increased personal income tax. They did that by essentially taxing inflation, and we know inflation has been at significant levels, and that Alberta families are feeling it in a big way, and they're paying more in income tax because of that as well. So that is one thing that would benefit every family if they actually reverse that, what Jason Kenney used to call an insidious tax grab, and actually left that money in Alberta family pockets. So that would be one. And then, of course, another one would be all of the fees that have been piled on, including school fees. A lot of families, back to school is an incredibly expensive time of year. We're seeing transportation fees going up most places across the province. We're seeing the actual cost of buying back to school supplies going up. And we know that they haven't done anything to actually address any of those pressures that are facing regular Alberta families.
Does the NDP have any idea of, what we can expect tomorrow? The surplus? Any internal conversations about what the surplus could be?
I expect, as somebody who watches the news, like all of you, that we will see significant revenue surplus based on natural resource revenue, which, of course, is something that this government has stumbled backwards into. It's not something that they did anything to set up conditions. Of course, the conflict happening in Ukraine and the war being forced on the people of Ukraine has had a significant impact on global commodity prices, specifically oil and gas, and that has in turn impacted the revenues that we're seeing in this province to some degree. That, of course, won't be sustained. We hope that war comes to an end very soon, and that we see things more stabilized around the world in terms of our energy supply and the safety and well-being of people.
Any other questions in person? We'll go to the phones. Just a reminder to press *9 if you're joining us on the phone. Raise a hand if you're joining us via Zoom. You can say your name and your outlet at the top. We'll go to our first caller.
I'm wondering, Ms. Hoffman, you spoke a little bit about, you're highlighting these fees that the government has brought in, and you mentioned bracket creep, but just to go back to Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe's proposal, do you think that cutting checks for $500 to residents is an effective way to combat rising costs, or do you think that it's a bad move economically?
I think as long as the government keeps jacking up fees, they can send out checks, but that money won't stay in people's pockets because the government is taking it back through increasing their personal income tax, charging them more to do basic things like send their kids to school or to pay accommodation fees when they have a loved one who needs to live in a senior's home. As long as they continue to jack up fees and nickel and dime families, kicking people off the seniors drug benefit plan, charging seniors for having a medical exam to be able to keep their driver's license, as long as this government, the Alberta government, keeps doing those things under the UCP to drive up costs, it doesn't matter how many checks they send out. That money will go back and will be taken from Alberta families. So the very first thing that they should do is reverse all of the attacks they've done to everybody's pocketbooks, to their ordinary bank accounts, and make life more sustainable and more affordable for Alberta families.
Any follow-up, Lisa?
Yeah, thanks. I'm wondering too, I mean, the government's position is that we can't depend on oil and gas revenues like we're expecting to see a windfall in tomorrow, and we have to be ready for these prices to drop again. Basically, you want to see these fees reversed and different fees returned to Albertans. But what do you do when the gas prices inevitably drop again? What do you think is a long-term sustainable way to deal with this surplus? I mean, some of the UCP leadership candidates are proposing things like putting a third of it into the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, along with different affordability measures. But savings is obviously important. What do you think is a long-term sustainable way to deal with these surpluses?
Yeah, and thanks for the question. Rachel has announced previously that the majority of whatever we were to realize in surplus, and let's be very honest, no matter who is governing today, there would be a significant surplus. If we had an NDP government, you'd also have less fees and a surplus. And with that surplus, we would put the majority into investing in sustainability for the future. So that would be a combination of saving through the Heritage Savings Trust Fund and investing in job creation today with increased diversification and more opportunities for people to work in a variety of sectors, so that when we do see increases and decreases in commodity prices, we can ride it out with other sectors in the economy as well. So the vast majority would still be invested in our future, but we also would make sure that we backstop some of the cuts that we've seen to healthcare and education and other vital programs that Albertans rely on every day for their safety, their well-being, and for their future.
We'll go to our next caller.
Hi, it's Michelle Belfontaine from CBC. Oh,
Hi,
hi, it's Michelle Belfontaine from CBC. Sorry about that. I didn't think my headset was on. I wanted to ask also about sustainability checks. And I mean, you talk about how you want to reduce fees, but the effect of that will take time. And so I'm wondering if a $500 check or a $400 check or whatever would actually have a bigger impact on people's most immediate needs.
Maybe for a couple of months, and then Jason Kenney's going to take it back through a big tax grab, or whoever the premier is, because they absolutely work to make sure that they jacked up personal income tax, that they're increasing fees. Parents right now are paying more in fees generally to send their kids to school this year than they have in the past. So, a short-term relief, we're certainly not ruling that out. But as long as the UCP government, whoever is in the premier's chair, continues to have these laws in place that jack up fees on ordinary families, charge more for tuition, charge more for them to be able to even go to parks or go to museums, as long as they continue to do those things, money won't stay in Albertans' pockets. And what we need is both short-term but more mid-term and longer-term relief for Alberta families who've been facing nothing but increased costs and downloading of fees onto them over the last 3.5 years, and they need relief.
Any follow-up, Michelle?
Yeah, you mentioned off the top, Sarah, where you were listing the things that you would like the government to roll back, and you were talking about school fees, and you said to remove certain school fees and lower others. Could you tell me some of the fees that you would like to have removed?
Yeah, so one of the things that the UCP reversed that we had in place was that if you were going to your neighborhood school, even if you had to take the bus to get to that, because of course not every neighborhood in our province has a school, that if you're going to your designated neighborhood school, you would not have to pay a transportation fee. And they got rid of that. So there are a lot of families who are paying hundreds of dollars right now to get their kids to the closest designated school. That's not fair. There should be no barrier to going to your local public Catholic or Francophone school. So that certainly is one. And then we've seen some other increase for language programming and a few other additional costs that again go back to that first year in the legislature when Jason Kenney was repealing a lot of the protections that we had around keeping costs more affordable for Alberta families.
Do one more pass for questions. Star 9 if you're on the phone. Raise hand if you're joining us via Zoom. And seeing none, that's all for today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Much for watching, and to learn more, check out albertasfuture.ca.